Welcome everybody to the Scale Up Show. This is your host Ryan Staley, and I have a very, very special guest with me today. I have Ed Roshitsh, who is the CEO of BrightFin, a 6X Inc. 5000 fastest growing company. He's also CEO of Holidays for Heroes, which is a nonprofit created to help active duty military people get home for Christmas. Author of A Solid Handshake, which is a book. On top of it too, he's had 7 X's and created over $3 billion. That's like a Dr. Evil B, $1 billion and increased shareholder value for multiple PE companies. Welcome, Ed. Happy to have you on the show, man.
I'm so excited to be here, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was fun just talking with you in advance, like it always is for me with my guests. So just so we can give everybody a quick perspective on where you're at now, it sounds like you've had a lot of exits. Let's walk through your revenue rundown. So where are you at in terms of the ARR revenue range?
Yeah, BrightFin's revenue is between 32 and 36 million in ARR. We're growing. It's an exciting run.
Okay, excellent. And then what's your primary go-to-market strategy? Is it sales, marketing, product-led, market-led? What would you classify?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. You know, some companies talk about being product-led companies. Some companies talk about being, sales, go-to-market led. I like to think of us as a solutions-led company. I don't want to solely rely on a great product or solely rely on a great sales force, service group. We really try to deliver a whole package without necessarily being led by one. So solutions-led.
That's a good, I've never heard anybody like answer that. And I don't know how I feel about it. Like if I feel really good about that or if I feel like, hey man, give me a little bit more, man. So are you bringing customers in primarily through sales or a lot of inbound? That's kind of more what I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's a combination of both. So we do a lot of direct selling. We also have a very vibrant partner ecosystem.
Oh, nice.
We also have a lot of word of mouth. We are a unique product. And as you know, folks in various industries talk amongst themselves about what's working, what's not working. And so we have a lot of client referrals that turn into prospects. So, and then we get some inbound, and we have a BDR group and all the other things you'd sort of contemplate. But yeah, it's not one crutch to hold us up. We get input from a lot of places.
Okay. And have you systemized referrals at all? Have you found a way to systemize customer to prospect referrals?
Probably not as good as we'd like to. It's mostly word of mouth. We get included in a lot of conversations because of people moving around in the industry, but we don't have a systemic approach to it.
Okay. And then what's your team size?
Yeah, so the company's north of 325 people. When you drill it down just specifically in sales, when you think about direct selling, channel sales, sales enablement, sales ops, all the sort of sales engineering, it's about a 35, 40 person sales unit.
Okay, cool. Excellent. And then, can you explain your solution in maybe 3-4 sentences or less?
Yeah, absolutely. We are the only company in the world, and I mean that offers technology expense management built on top of the ServiceNow workflow architecture. So think about a big Fortune 500 organization, everybody running around with tens of thousands of company issued Ds, fixed lines, software subscriptions, cloud subscriptions. It's a crazy complex thing to manage. Our software helps folks get visibility to the spend, forecast where the spend is going, and then manage contracts and things like that. So it's really a vital set of software for, again, Fortune 1000 globally running ServiceNow.
Yeah, ServiceNow is doing a hell of a job, right? They're supposed to top off at. It was funny. There's a post about this with the enterprise space and how that they're specifically enterprise only, and then you look at it and they're like, well, they've outgrown the Inc. 1000. Now they have the Inc. 2000, and so it's interesting, but they're still getting that enterprise buy from them. So
yeah, they're ubiquitous in the Fortune 2000 global.
Yeah. So what about, are you bootstrapped or funded?
Yeah, so were put together actually by a private equity firm out of Chicago, Periscope Equity. They had a hypothesis about our market, and they took three companies, believe it or not, during the peak of COVID, and put them together as a single entity called BrightFin. Nobody met each other in person. It was all done via 2D. And so we formed the company in January of 2020, 2021, right at the peak of COVID. And we just started getting back in person here in the last quarter or two.
That's wild. And can I ask you this just out of curiosity, like how big was the company in terms of the parts when you guys first formed in terms of revenue?
Yeah, probably 5 to 6 million in ARR less than we are today.
Okay.
Each of those entities were, 10 ish, sub 10-ish million in ARR. And so when we got combined together, we were underneath 30.
Okay, cool. So obviously you're doing some amazing things today, and I definitely want to dig into that story a little bit later, but let's get into, how you got to this point. Because one of the things that I mentioned is you're a marathon runner. We talked before, I know you got a vineyard, you're doing lots of cool things. You've been in advisory, 7 exits. That's a hell of a journey, right? You're just getting started. You got a nonprofit that you're the CEO of, which is amazing. So how'd you get to this point? Like, that's a lot of different things. It's almost like you kind of sound like the Forrest Gump of the SaaS world with all the different adventures you've had, right?
Well, yeah, I will tell you this, and it's not false humility. I am one of the luckiest people on the face of the planet when it's come to my life, both professionally and personally. I was lucky enough to be part of a team that JMI Equity and Hellman Friedman had pulled together to buy a company called Blackbaud, which is a household name in not-for-profit fundraising software. It was part of the team that took that public. And I stayed with JMI Equity companies 80% of my career, frankly, up until the last little bit. I'm still on an advisory board or two with JMI on a couple of other things. But I've been fortunate enough to be with the right group of people on the right projects at the right time. And again, really lucky. Of course, I've worked hard and didn't make some bad decisions and things like that. But really, it was about the setup, who I was running with, and that team.
That is very humble.
Reality, yeah.
But it's obviously you're doing something right. So you got put together with an awesome team, and you mentioned that before we even started the show, right? About just some of the amazing people that you've worked with. What's the common thread that you saw that delivered 7 exits, and that's leading to the growth from that combination right now? Like, what's the common thread that you see?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Repeatable operational processes, measuring what gets done. I'm a big fan of the book Predictive Revenue on the sales and go-to-market front, and have implemented that playbook both as a SVP of sales, COO, CEO, and I'm a big fan of that. I would also say 100% of it is codependent on the executive team that you build and the people, they're next and they're next and they're next. Because I'm a firm believer, if you get a decent idea with great people behind it, you can do some amazing things.
And I had to put my mic on mute there. It seems like there's like a lawnmower that's just like hanging outside my window right now. They don't want to go away.
Always the case.
Like earlier today, like I was all pumped because I got fiber in for internet, and then my internet crashed. And then now, like, it's been quiet all day, and then it just sounds like literally there's like a wood chipper outside my window. So, anyways, it's like doing a demo, right? Like that big demo one of your team has, and everything goes wrong. Okay, predictable revenue, codependent on an amazing leadership team. Like, how do you get more granular than that? So, like, if you're creating the engine of operational excellence to do that, and when you say predictable revenue, I understand what you mean, but you, the listener, might not understand exactly what that means. So can you walk through the specifics of what you mean by applying the principles in that book?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things that in that book that I've taken away and modified and observed, and frankly, I don't have any new ideas of my own. I rip off everybody else's good ideas, but it really starts with marketing, making sure you've got a multi-fronted marketing approach that is measurable. Lots of KPIs underneath. MQLs probably being the one that you're most interested in, and the conversion to sales accepted leads, and then a well-defined, well-gated sales process that starts with BDRs that take these MQLs and do their thing and try to get them converted into discovery calls, sales accepted leads, etc. In addition, then, going into that gated pipeline, a lot of unsophisticated sales organizations say, give me a forecast. Oh, I think that one's coming in. I think that one's coming in. If you get a lot of at-bats and you're measuring it well, in each stage, you can gauge close rates, days to close. You can influence deal sizes. And what you're really looking for are prospect defined indicators to take all of the Kentucky poetry out of the sales forecasting process and say, hey, look, we've got 17 deals in stage one, 2 gates to get into the next stage of stage 2. And oh yeah, by the way, we know that when we reach here, 37% of our deals close. We reach here, 27%, and on down the line. And if you can build that and get enough people adhering to it, and have a sales leadership team that can do the forensics to make sure there's no inflation or deflation, you can build a pretty good, predictable revenue path just by reverse engineering how many you need of X, Y, and Z in order to make an outcome. And that's what I mean by predictable revenue.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. And it's measuring to the metrics. And it's funny, I was talking about this with the founder yesterday about setting up his own operating system for managing those metrics, right? Because it's easy to have when you're earlier on or you're bootstrapped and you're not familiar with that model to have a one-on-one once a month with your team, right? Because you're managing the rest of the business or other things like that. But if you get it down to that level, I mean, there's I mapped out 6 or 7 easy indicators that you could use to grow revenue without adding a single person or without adding a single SDR, right?
Sure.
So, yeah, I think you nailed it on the head right there.
Well, yeah, I think one of the things I usually whiteboard out for people is, there's really only 3 or 4 things you can actually influence. Your close rate, the number of opportunities you have in your pipeline, the size of the pipeline, and then days within the pipeline. And if you can get 5 to 10% improvement across each of those metrics, that compounding accumulative improvement pays big dividends.
So we got close rate, you got days in the cycle, right? Then you got size, and then the quantity going in.
Yeah. Those are the 4 things you can influence, and everything else sort of centers around those 4 things.
Yep. Where do you see, because the number one thing that I see people miss is the speed, right? They ignore the speed. They don't, because it's pretty simple math, right? If you could do 12 deals in 12 months, if you do 12 deals in 6 months and you still have the other variables consistent, you just double your revenue, right? So
Right.
But if we're talking, where do you see, with all the companies you've worked with, the operating companies, what do you think of that formula that you talked about in predictable revenue with all the way from MQLs to SQLs to the sales stage? What do you think is the hardest part for companies to execute on, like SaaS companies in particular?
I think if you had asked me this question a couple of years ago, I would have given you a different answer. But I think COVID has made the marketing BDR function really hard because most of us are not working from an office. Most of us aren't posting our cell phone numbers for phone calls in. And so you really have to do, right now, I believe the hardest work is to cut through the noise digitally on your website, your digital marketing, BDR outreach, managing that process. Because back when I was learning how to sell, you get on the phone and you just pound it, smiling and dialing, and you didn't have all the tools we have today. You didn't have all the sophistication around tracking email opens and things like that, and MQLs weren't you know um, nurture campaigns and lead scoring, all that didn't exist 20 years ago the way it does today. But I think that BDR function is the hardest thing right now.
Yeah. Well, especially because it's a mentally tough job to do. Um, the shelf life, numbers wise, is about 18 months where people
Yep.
get fried on it. And based on the comp, you're typically targeting in the responsibilities people that are shortly out of school or just out of school,
Totally.
So you mix the lack of experience, the mental whipping that you get, and then just the complexity of the job too. So yeah, that totally makes sense. It's funny because that's where I started off too, making 250 dials a day. I wasn't a BDR, and I'm doing air quotes right now. I wasn't a BDR, but it was like it almost it almost reminded me of like a boiler room, right, where we had to like one call close people and just like dial and dial and dial. So my heart goes out to anybody who's going through that because it's a tough
Yeah.
job, but it's character building.
I've always wondered what would happen, because when you think about it, it's sort of weird. You're putting the most inexperienced, least wisdom filled person on the front end of that sales process. I always wondered what would happen if you took one of your big game hunters and put them on the front end of the pipeline to have that initial dialogue, if they can make a connection with somebody at a prospect, to see if it would alter the outcome. Because I think what ends up happening a lot, the BDRs, as you said, maybe fresh out of college, maybe their first sales job, a sophisticated buyer, if they do answer the phone, for example, or do respond to an email, if you match that person up with a relatively inexperienced sales resource, the outcome is not going to be so strong.
All right, Ed. So one of the things that I was thinking through, you just mentioned, first of all, we got predictable revenue, that would, and you classified, we dug into that. What about leadership? You mentioned you had an awesome leadership team that you worked with through multiple exits. I know you literally wrote a book on it. So what's your perspective on leadership, and like, how do you create a team like you did to create the results that you've already achieved?
Yeah, so been fortunate to have been drafted into some great teams, and then also as a CEO, chief operating officer, been able to build some great teams. And I think, Warren Buffett's not wrong, right? Integrity and intelligence, are two of the biggest components, biggest factors in building great leadership teams. I think additionally, I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni's Five Dysfunctions book. And in fact, the last two or three companies that I've been at, we've brought in Table Group affiliates to create that team one atmosphere with the executive leadership team. Trust, healthy conflict, results orientation, being three of the five pillars. And it's really changed, because what I really don't want the leadership team doing is burning any calories, trying to figure out if I could trust you, or are we all in this together? Are we trying to be building fiefdoms and very parochial? And we're thinking this leadership team that partly inherited, partly created, the last leadership team partly inherited, partly created. We don't spend any time on politics or trying to figure out how to protect our own turf. It's how are we going to win today? How are we going to focus on the mission versus how many people are getting, X, Y, and Z reports or whatever underneath the org chart, or playing those kind of games. And I think that really frees up time and resources to focus on the things that matter. The other thing is, I'm a big fan of rhythm systems, and I don't know if that's a familiar term, but there's a software philosophy and a strategic philosophy out of North Carolina that been with the last couple of companies, where you set up an operating cadence, a rhythm per se, and focusing on 13-week sprints at the executive level on key initiatives that you've identified a year in advance. And it really focuses the team, their dashboards, red, yellow, green dashboards. And so that ethos of Team One that the Table Group espouses, combined with an operational cadence, two very powerful dynamics that I think improve the rate of speed for any company.
Okay, and I love that. Is the solution you use called Results BI at all?
No, it's
Or no?
actually Rhythm Systems.
Oh, it's called Rhythm Systems.
Yeah,
Okay, I gotcha.
yeah, Rhythm
We,
Cloud,
uh, we
Rhythm.cloud, I think is where they're at.
okay, so when you said Rhythm Systems, I thought you meant it was just like a okay. So that's actually the name of the company. Okay, so that's really cool. Results BI is a friend of the pod. It was Mark's one of the founders I interviewed on here. So and he talks about this specifically with the 13-week formula
Yeah.
of leveraging that.
And,
So
and I think the last ingredient is setting forth a number of principles. So our company has 10 operating principles that I talk about nearly every week, every town hall. We use them as our operating system as humans. And, a lot of them are focused on trust being our only commodity, transparency, um, you know, uh, everything we do should be on the front page of the New York Times, or something we'd be proud of. It showed up in the press somewhere. And so there's 10 things that we talk about, aspire to, try to live to. We fail sometimes, just like everybody else does. We're human. But those three things, those three elements, the Team One idea, an operating cadence, and a human operating system, those three things will propel you much further than any haphazard approach.
I love that. So like it's like a single source of team truth. You mentioned that rhythm, operating system, and then the principles, right? The 10
Mhm.
principles. Would you be comfortable walking us through the 10 principles? Because I know you mentioned integrity and honesty or transparency, I should
Yeah.
say.
So yeah, I'll see if I can pull all 10 of them off the top of my head, because I don't have them in front of me. So this will be a real test. But I think transparency uh, is one. And to illustrate that, like almost every number our company gets in a report from me, town halls, things like that, I want people to be informed, and they don't have to necessarily agree with every decision we make, but at least they have the context and information to understand some of the decisions, whether they agree with them or not. Trust being our only currency, that's critical. Being results and performance oriented is third. Not doing anything we'd be unproud of if it got out of our building. You see all sorts of bad headlines with companies doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing. Collaboration, consensus building is our main vehicle to get to the best decisions, is another one. No gossip, no drama, no energy waste on things like that. Only hiring the best people we can and keeping the best people we can. So those are, I think, 8 of them, and I'm going to struggle the last one or two, and I'll slap myself on the forehead when I go back later. But they're all they're not non-commonsensical, but I've really tried to orient the company, and the leadership team has really tried to orient the company on let's be a Snow White business. Let's do the right thing every time, and we might lose in the short run, but the long run, those principles are gonna drive us forward.
Well, and I think I might know your answer on this, but I mean, I love the concept of it because
Yep.
you threw results orientated in there, but then the rest of it's around being a good person and treating people
Yep.
right.
Yeah,
And
that's one of
it's
the ones I forgot. Dignity and respect. We're going to offer
okay.
dignity and respect to all of our teammates, our partners, our clients, and investors.
Okay. So I'm in alignment. I'm getting it. So what would you say is the biggest challenge on executing on those consistently, especially when you have a human living organization of different people and personalities and priorities and egos and motivation. So like what's the biggest challenge on making that a
Yeah.
continuous reality?
Yeah, one of the principles is bad news should travel faster than good. That was the 10th one that I forgot. And I think that's one of the hardest one for people to get their heads wrapped around. Because what happens in most organizations? You try to polish the bad news so it's not necessarily bad news. And I'm constantly telling the team, like, look, bad news should travel faster than good so that we can fix it and learn from it. And no stoning of messengers here. And if you did your homework and you put in the work and something blew up, hey, that's okay. I do 5 of those a day myself, where it's like, okay, this is what I should do here. I've done my homework. Wow, seemed like a good idea at the time, but boy, it didn't work out the way I thought it was going to work out. And it takes a while for people to really get it that you actually mean that. And of course, you can't make horrific mistakes every day, ad infinitum. But don't worry about coming to the table with a red on your dashboard if you did your homework, and just figure out, offer the solution. I know it sounds so trite and cliche, but just fix it. Talk about fixing it. Don't worry about getting beat up for it.
I love that. Yeah. Those are great operating principles. I might borrow some of them, recycle, borrow,
I'll send you, I'll
integrating.
send you the PowerPoint slide, but I did manage to hit all 10 of them. I had I added the other 2 late.
It's all right. I put you on the spot. It's understandable. So, so it sounds like you. I get why you wrote a book on leadership. Now, after talking through this deeper with you, what's your single biggest challenge with growing right now?
Resources. There's never enough resources to tackle everything you want to tackle. So whether it's brain resources, capital resources, time resources, those 3 things are really hard to come by. And what it forces you to do is to get really smart on your priorities and figure out how to say no to as many things as you possibly can. Our chief customer officer has a saying, walk by some of the dumpster fires because there's a house on fire down the road. Don't worry about that dumpster that's burning. Go attack the house. And he's so right, because a lot of people get squirreled, right, by every little thing that comes their way. Yep, that dumpster's on fire, but I'm going to keep walking by it because I had to go attack this bigger thing. Is something I think we learn as a result of having resource constriction.
I love that. All right. Well, we're just about up on time, and this is an awesome time that we spent. Even though that the lawnmower's been outside half the time, distracted me, but been focused on you, man, because it's very easy. You're dropping some gold here. So, okay. Just to wrap things up, like, what's your favorite book that you've read?
The favorite book I've read, that's
Well, it could be
probably,
over the last 2 years too. It doesn't have to be all
yeah.
time.
I'm a big fan of Principles by Ray Dalio. I'm a big fan of any Stoic era philosophy books. Marcus Aurelius, just picked up another great one. I've read it 3 times now. The Practicing Stoic by Wayne Farnsworth, I think it's Wade Farnsworth.
Oh, cool.
Another one I just picked up about a month ago and read it 2 or 3 times already is the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but man, you talk about dropping some gold. That's a great book.
I've heard of Naval. I've never heard of that book though, ironically.
Yeah,
So,
it's a guy who compiled and condensed all his podcasts, all of his writing into a book. And literally, it's one of those books you just dump into a vat of highlighter ink by the time you're done versus, little ones here and there because almost every word in it was just amazing. To me, it was.
wow. So, who's a CEO or founder then that you admire and look up to what they're doing and trying to emulate?
I'm not sure I would say any one. Like, you look at some of the luminary names like Tim Cook, oh my gosh, amazing operational genius. You look at Elon Musk, Elon's got his nuances, but you can't argue against his brilliance and ability to take ideas to the next level. I had a CEO I worked for early in my career, a guy named Bob Sawolski, that taught me probably 70% of what I know now. So I have borrowed from probably 10 different CEOs. Jack Welch, I know it's an old name, but boy, there was some gold in some of the stuff he did. I mean, he rubbed some people the wrong way as well, but there was some real gold there.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like I was thinking of that when you were talking earlier, like some of the principles with the human operating system, it's like talked about a lot in the book, the Rockefeller principles, mastering the Rockefeller habits, I think is what it's called. And then principles. Yeah, I've read that too, but it's been a while. I read it right when it came out, so I imagine I'd have a completely different view of it now.
I'll go back. My thing is, I used to brag about how many books I read. Now I brag about how many times I've read a book, because every time you go back to a book, you're in a different place in your life and your wisdom, and maybe some words that didn't hop at you 3 years ago. You're like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense now.
It's true. I used to have the same thing. I'm in the habit now of rereading books multiple times because of the different layers. I mean, on average, people only retain about 10%. If you're good, maybe 20 to 30. So that means there's a whole 60, 70% if it's a really good book to get the rest of it out of it. So, okay, last but not least, what advice would you give to yourself knowing what you know now when you're first starting in business or working at your first startup?
I would. I've come a long way in my career, but I would say be focused on trying to figure out ways to help people around you versus focusing on trying to help yourself. Because I've gotten so much better at it in my later career years. But I was one of those guys who was focused, especially in sales, right? You're a shark. You're trying to find that one drop of blood in the water to go get. And you're probably not a joy to be around. And what I found is I toned down your best leaders aren't necessarily the ones that are all in it for themselves. They're the ones that figure out a way to coach and share and get people to step up a level on their own without them realizing that you helped them do it. And I would say that would be something, those three, that sort of thematic, don't focus so much on myself, focus on how to help others. That I wish I would have learned that a lot earlier in my career.
It's hard because it seems counterintuitive sometimes,
Yeah.
But
Well, the best sales managers are never, the best sales leaders are never, there might be one in the history of selling, right? Are never your best performers. They're in the top 30% usually, but they're the people that people go to for help. And those are the ones that typically that rise up in a sales org.
Well, yeah, and a real life example of that is like look at Michael Jordan, right? Probably the best player that ever lived. Depending on who you back, but I would back him as the GOAT for basketball.
Sure.
Was a terrible coach, right?
Yeah.
Like it didn't work out, right? And then you look at like Steve Kerr, who was good. He wasn't best of all time or Hall of Fame level, and he's potentially a Hall of Fame coach now, So it's just kind of crazy how that changes. So I love that. So it was awesome having you on the show, Ed. Can you let people know where they could find you, where they could find out more about BrightFin and Holidays for the Heroes and stuff like that?
Yeah, so probably the best place to go for all of that in one concise place is my LinkedIn profile, Ed Roshitsh, Roshitsh at LinkedIn. And I've got my links to BrightFin, Holidays for the Heroes, book, whatever. That's probably the easiest place, my LinkedIn profile.
Awesome. Well, it was a pleasure having you on, man. It was great getting your perspective on leadership. I know there's a handful of things that I can instantly leverage from what we discussed today. So thank you for sharing and giving back.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I feel privileged.